This is Cogitations with Carl Hartman, minister at Main Street Church of Christ in Lockney.
Good morning out there in Radio Land. I'm glad you have chosen to tune your radio dial to 106.1 The Flip FM this Sunday morning and join us for another iteration of Cogitations. I had mentioned, I believe, last Sunday that we would have a guest on if everything worked out this morning, and I do have that guest with me. The guest is Norman Bearden. He is with the West Texas State Veterans Cemeteries and does some stuff with the Texas State Land Grant, I think. But here in a minute, he's going to tell us a lot more about what they do. And I know generally on Cogitations, we talk a lot about theological things and spiritual matters. But if you go way back to the very first program, I said there'd be a lot of things mixed in there from time to time when it comes to veterans, because veterans are near and dear to my heart. And even on Memorial Day and Veterans Day, we tend to center the program around that and even have veterans that come on from time to time during those time periods to talk about those things. And of course, we have coming up, as this is airing, Veterans Day. And it's a time that we remember and reflect on those veterans. And there's a lot of things in which veterans struggle with, that veterans and their families deal with, that can impact their spiritual walk. And one of the things I think in my mind, I might learn better here as we go through this program, some things that impact that spiritual walk can be lessened by organizations such as Norman is a part of, by sort of reducing some of those worldly pressures, those worldly worries, particularly when it comes to end of life, particularly when it comes to other aspects of the spiritual walk of a veteran and their family members, to kind of lift some of those worries and some of those concerns that can bog us down and impact us. So we're going to kind of turn our program now over to Norman to introduce himself, tell us a little bit more about what he does and what his organization does, because they do a lot more, from what I've understand with my brief conversation with him, than just maintaining those cemeteries that veterans can utilize for their final resting place. So, Norman, I'm going to turn the mic over to you.
Good morning, Carl, and it is a great pleasure to be here today. Pretty close to my hometown, a little bit ways west of here in Plainview. That's where I left for the Navy back in 1984, right after I graduated from high school. So I feel very much at home in these parts, and just great to be here to tell you a little bit more about the West Texas State Veterans Cemetery today. First off, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the General Land Office, who sponsors the Texas Veterans Land Board. The General Land Office is the oldest state agency in Texas, chartered by the Texas State Constitution. So as part of the General Land Office, the Land Board has two major programs. The Texas State Veterans Homes, which you might have heard of. We have one over in Amarillo, the Ussery Roan Texas State Veterans Home, that offers a wonderful place for our veterans to spend their days if they need assisted living or even more care for them there. There's also a home over in Big Spring. So I'm very familiar with the home in Amarillo. I had family that worked there and spent quite a few hours there myself volunteering. So just a beautiful facility. On the other hand, they have the Texas State Veterans Cemetery Program, of which there are 4 operational cemeteries in the state of Texas. The largest is in Killeen, Central Texas. State Veterans Cemetery, of course, a very large military presence there with Fort Cavazos being so close by. Then we have one down in Mission, Texas, the Rio Grande State Veterans Cemetery. We just returned from the last cemetery that was opened, which is down in Corpus Christi, the Coastal Bend State Veterans Cemetery. And so it was good to see some expansion going on there at Coastal Bend. They also have a very large military presence down there in that area. So those veterans have a wonderful place to call their final home. And then the fourth operational cemetery is over in Abilene, which is the closest cemetery to the Lubbock area. If you haven't been to the State Veterans Cemetery at Abilene, I highly encourage you to take the short trip over there to visit that cemetery, especially coming up on Veterans Day. They do have a ceremony there, 11 o'clock in the morning, and we just urge everyone to go over and visit. I've been there for the past two years at Veterans Day and Memorial Day. They just do a fantastic program over there, honoring veterans of all eras, but especially paying homage to those that lie and rest there at the Veterans Cemetery. We like to think for Lubbock that we took all the best features of those four cemeteries and incorporated them into the planning of the cemetery here in Lubbock. So the big old Texas Star is incorporated in there. The Avenue of Flags, which is just past the main gate coming into the cemetery. And just when you come in, of course, the Texas flag is first, and then behind that, and of course, the center of the cemetery is the American flag, a big, beautiful American flag. And so we like to think that we kind of have the best features of all the other cemeteries, and so we're very proud of the beginnings that we have there. We did groundbreaking last November, and the contractual end date of this project is November 20th of next year. And we hope to open soon after that. So, of course, nothing is written in stone yet, but we do have a date that we're shooting for, which is December 12th for our ribbon cutting and the grand opening. We plan to host an open house. And the best part about all this is our first interment. We hope to have a local hero, Lieutenant Colonel George Davis, who is a two-time war ace, both in World War II and Korea. He was shot down over Korea, and there is reports that either some of his remains or some of his personal belongings are in a museum over in Korea. So we have launched a campaign, mainly spearheaded by the VFW Post 2466 there in Lubbock, to bring him home and put him finally at rest in the Veterans Cemetery there in Lubbock. We have located his next of kin, which is a son that resides there in Lubbock. We're very much anticipating a visit with him, and hope to learn more about his father, Colonel Davis, and just bring honor to the sacrifice that he made. Certainly paid the ultimate sacrifice over in hostile territory, and we want to honor him in every possible way that we can. So we're not just going to inter him at the Veterans Cemetery. He earned the Medal of Honor, which is the highest military award you can earn, and we want to pay tribute to that by having a section set aside at our Veterans Cemetery for Medal of Honor winners. We expect that this will not be our last Medal of Honor, but the first. And so we do plan to inter him at the cemetery on our opening. So a few things about the cemetery. It came about from the donation of 100 acres of land owned by the city of Lubbock. And they donated that property to the General Land Office for the purpose of constructing the Veterans Cemetery. This all took place back in 2022. We were not the top of the list to get the next Veterans Cemetery. There was two other areas in Texas that had a higher unserved veteran population. But because the city donated the land to the General Land Office, that kind of moved us to the top. So we were very fortunate to have 4 generals in particular in the Lubbock area, as well as elected officials that really pushed to get this cemetery open in Lubbock. So we're very grateful to those folks that really pushed hard to make this all become a living project here in Lubbock. So when we do open, we're going to have 4,110 spaces for veterans. We have been doing pre-registrations at the VA clinic there in Lubbock, and up to date we have about 828 veterans and their families pre-registered for the cemetery, which means that once we do open, there will be quite a few that will want to go ahead and inter those that have been cremated and just waiting for the cemetery to open. We also anticipate quite a few veterans that have been interred at other cemeteries, including Abilene, to be disinterred from their current resting place and transferred to Lubbock for reinterment there at the Veterans Cemetery. So we are anticipating quite a number of those. I believe one of the generals, one of the 4 that I mentioned, is interred at a private cemetery, and we're expecting him to be moved over to the Lubbock Cemetery as his final wish. So very much looking forward to bringing all those over to the Veterans Cemetery. So even though we have over 800 folks pre-registered for the cemetery, there's still plenty of room. We won't ever run out of space. We always plan to stay ahead of the need at all of our state cemeteries. We are working on a 4-year plan for expansion. And that's already underway at the other state cemeteries, as I mentioned before, even down at Corpus Christi, and just getting ready to begin a major expansion over at Central Texas and Killeen. So we always stay ahead of the need for interment spaces at the Veterans Cemetery. So once we are open and we have some data collected for a period of time, then we will look at the next expansion to make sure that we do stay ahead of the current need. So we do expect to have very similar burial rates as our sister cemetery over there in Abilene. So we just are very excited to bring this Veterans Cemetery to Lubbock and to get it operational. It will be the 5th state Veterans Cemetery. Hopefully it won't be the last. There's some talks right now of opening a 6th Veterans Cemetery over in East Texas. We hope that comes to fruition in the near future. But as always, we want to provide a proper, dignified, and a very meaningful final resting place for our nation's heroes and their families. That brings up part of a question that comes up: who's eligible for interment at the Veterans Cemetery? Of course, a veteran is defined by the Veterans Administration as someone who has committed to serve the United States, the military service, and has completed at least 24 months of active federal service. There are exceptions to that. I believe it's September of 1980. If you served prior to that date, that 24 months is not really. It's not necessary. So if you did serve prior to 1980, we encourage you to go ahead and apply, and we would be happy to get your pre-registration taken care of. So, and also the discharge required is a honorable, but we will accept general under honorable discharges as well. Anything below that, unfortunately, is not eligible for interment at a state cemetery or a national cemetery, which brings to mind the benefit to the veteran, whether it be a state veteran cemetery or a national cemetery, is the same. It's identical because we both are administered by the National Cemetery Administration, which is a part of the Veterans Administration. So we follow the very same policies, the same instructions that the NCA puts out to the national cemetery. So the benefit is the very same, whether you choose to be interred at a national cemetery or a state veteran cemetery. And I will say that the process to apply for a state cemetery is so much faster and simpler at a state veteran cemetery than the national. Of course, the government is involved there, and it's a very lengthy application. So, but also the other side of that is the national cemeteries have filled up. Some to a point where they have to move to a different area and build a new national cemetery. That's what has happened over in Albuquerque. The National Cemetery in Santa Fe is almost full, so they are already planning construction of a new national cemetery over in Albuquerque. So I believe that is the closest national cemetery to Lubbock area, but there is one down in Grand Prairie, Texas. So, but there are 4 national cemeteries. There's actually 5 national cemeteries in Texas. 4 of them are open. The 5th is full, so they are not accepting new interments, but you can visit the graves there. And then, of course, the 4 state veteran cemeteries, soon to be the 5th, will augment those national cemeteries. The national cemeteries are at the large metropolis, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, El Paso, and then the state veteran cemetery kind of take the next smaller towns. So Killeen, Abilene, Corpus Christi, and of course, soon to be Lubbock and Mission. So very happy to be able to kind of jump in there and fill those gaps that the larger national cemeteries miss. So I guess that's about all I have right at the moment. Do you have any questions for me, Carl?
Oh, yeah, I thought of several questions, some of them from my just past experience and my own experience with, my father setting up this process of having a plot in a veterans cemetery, and some questions that came up in a similar broadcast. I used to have a radio program in Tennessee called Veterans Voice, and it was 30 minutes every morning, Monday through Friday. And so we had some folks on at one point talking about cemetery projects there. At the time, there was a new veteran cemetery being built kind of down the road east of Jackson, Tennessee. And it was relatively new project. It was being built when I was there. And in fact, my mom is buried there. And that kind of brought me into one question. And just to kind of clarify for the folks, you answered some of them that I wrote down. I crossed them out as you answered them. But, and you kind of already hit the one on pre-registration. That's very important. It's a worry and a burden that can be taken away from the family. You've already got the plot set up. It's a cost that is alleviated from the family as well. It's just like going to the funeral home and pre-planning that funeral and having that prepaid package just takes a whole lot of worry off a very stressful time and a very challenging time. So not only, is it a benefit that the veteran has, but it's a service you can do for your own family to just kind of remove that logistic off the table and they don't have to worry about it. Moving plots. My dad, when he's a veteran from the Vietnam era, although he never deployed to Vietnam, but he was active Air Force at the time, and he served, and as he was kind of getting on in life and beginning to think about, okay, these final arrangements, well, in talking to him, I'm like, well, you're eligible for a plot at a veteran cemetery. He wasn't really tracking that, and some people aren't thinking about that. And so he, in Georgia at the time, went and got a plot at the nearest location to him. But then a couple years later, they followed me and my family to Tennessee. And he was able then to kind of go back in with the veteran registry system and move that plot. Now, that was Georgia and Tennessee. Is that still something possible to take? I know people might be thinking, hey, if I register now, am I locked in? What if my family moves to another state? and then they got to bring my body back. Well, can you move the plot?
Well, to answer that question, we have to be careful when it's a transfer between national veteran cemetery and state cemetery. So I have received questions like that I've already been pre-approved for burial at, say, Arlington, but I want to be here in Lubbock where I'm closer to family. Can I transfer that plot from Arlington to Lubbock? The answer is no, unfortunately, because we have a completely different registration process than the national. So you can have an active registration at a national cemetery and an active registration at a state veteran cemetery, at least in Texas. I'm not sure about other states. Another thing I'm not sure of is if a veteran wanted to be disinterred from a national cemetery and reinterred at a state cemetery. Of course, you would still have to do the application process at the state cemetery. But then, of course, there's also the disinterment application at the national side. But I will say that if you wish to be transferred from one Texas State Veteran Cemetery to another, such as the case for we have a few veterans over in Abilene that the family wants to bring them home to Lubbock. So because that's in-state transfer, we do not charge anything to disinter that veteran from their current resting place, say in Abilene, and then to reinter them at the State Veteran Cemetery in Lubbock. The only cost that would be incurred by that move would be for the transportation of the remains from one cemetery to the other. So, in the case of Abilene to Lubbock, I don't really know what that would cost, but I do know that it would be a third-party transportation company. And then also another cost that you have to think of is if it is a traditional casket that is disinterred, then that must be placed in a sealed container for transport. Department of Transportation requires that, and so of course a casket is not considered a sealed container, at least at that point. So it has to go into another container of sorts that is sealed before they can transport that. So that in itself would be an additional cost. But the actual disinterment and reinterment is we don't charge for that. So that is a cost-saving benefit to the veterans. But now, of course, from a private cemetery to a state veteran cemetery, that there would be the cost of the disinterment. Have to have a funeral director on site to supervise. In some cases, they require a medical examiner, I believe, because certain regulations. But so there are some costs involved if it's from a private to a state veteran cemetery. But yes, you can have active registrations at both of them at the same time. What I tell people that pre-register for Lubbock that is if you do have an active state an application for Abilene and the space is needed before the cemetery in Lubbock is open, the family is under no obligation to use that pre-registration. So if the family decides that Abilene is too far away and they wish to make local arrangements, they're free to do so at there's no penalty or anything for not using that pre-registration. We would like for them to, let us know that they won't be using that if they could, but they are under no obligation to use that.
Yeah. And I've found in the past too, just clear, open communication usually comes to your benefit. And being a minister, I've worked with a lot of funeral homes and a lot of folks that will do that, have to transport bodies even across states. And there's been a few cases, I can't speak for the industry, but there's been a few cases where the family is like, look, we have this loved one, this opportunities available to move them to this veteran. And as soon as a lot of people hear veteran, military veteran, you might find a discount involved. And I've known a few cases where the people that do the transport business actually just said, and it's probably because the distance wasn't a big cost for them to move it. It wasn't, it was only a couple 100 miles. We're not talking thousands of miles. They're like, we'll just do it. So always kind of get a feel for what people will do to assist in those times, because you'll find that the bulk of people are very generous and very working. Even one case, the family couldn't afford it at the time, but might be able to afford it over time. And the place is like, well, what payments are comfortable for you? And they just worked out a thing where they just paid it off actually over 2 years for that movement of that body, which was from one state to another. So it was a much bigger move than just a local move within a state, although Texas is a very huge state, so one side to the other. So another question that came to mind, and this is the case, and we got about 5 minutes left, so this will probably be our last question. Right now, my dad does not occupy his spot in Tennessee. In fact, he's living in Florida now. My mom passed away before him, and she is buried at his spot, and they will stack it. Okay, so your spouse can be buried with you at the Veterans Cemetery, even if they didn't serve in the military. Is that the case here in Texas?
Absolutely. That's absolutely correct. The spouse is included under the veterans benefit, and it doesn't matter who deceases first. If the spouse deceases first, then they are interred first, and then the veteran would be added to that plot later.
Right. And so that's another thing to think about. A lot of people don't realize that, and it takes away another financial burden from the family. And, financial burdens can lead into all kinds of other burdens. And the Texas Veterans Cemetery Program has really done a lot to remove some of that final arrangement burden from the veteran and from their family. You got anything else to share with us, Norman, before we wrap up the program today?
Yes, absolutely. One thing that I commonly hear at at my table at the VA clinic is, I don't need that. I'm going to be cremated. So what they don't realize is that, a veteran cemetery is not just for traditional casket burials. In fact, we have 500 double-depth crypts that we will open with for traditional. But then we have over 3,500 spaces for cremains. So, yes, absolutely. Even if you are cremated, and it certainly makes it a lot easier in case something happens and they decease before the cemetery is open. A cremation, you can put the urn on a shelf and hold that until the cemetery is open. So we welcome all veterans, regardless of what their plans are for their traditional casket burial or cremation. So please come and talk to us.
Yep. And the last thing I'm going to throw out there before I wrap up the program, I don't know how many cemeteries the people listening have visited. I have been by many gravesides over my years conducting graveside funerals, and a lot of cemeteries in towns, this isn't to knock anybody. I mean, we only can use the resources that we have and the manpower and finances we have available at a local level to maintain cemeteries. But I have been to many cemeteries that were not well maintained. For one reason or another, grass is knee high, sites are in disrepair, there is garbage, there is trash around, which people do the best they can do, but it can also not be very appealing for the family that may be coming to visit, or the family that's coming for the next internment there at the cemetery. And veteran cemeteries are not so. I have never been to one whose grass was not cut with precision, that was not clean, that was not well maintained, because after all, they have an abundant access to resources to make sure that final resting place stays pristine and honorable. Well, Norman, I thank you for joining us today, for sharing that bulk of information with us. Anytime you got other things to share, the program is open and available to you. And before we sign off, I want to make sure everybody just stays cognitive of tomorrow. Tomorrow is Veterans Day. Honor those who have served, those who are serving. Remember, Veterans Day is to honor those who are still with us. Memorial Day is to honor those who have already passed from this life to the next. Take time tomorrow, take time every day to just show your gratitude and your thanks. Thank you again for joining us here on 106.1 The Flip FM for another installment of Cogitations. I hope God blesses you, watches over you, gives you peace and encouragement throughout the week ahead.
Tune in next Sunday at 9 for another edition of Cogitations with Carl Hartman, minister at Main Street Church of Christ in Lockney.